Well, Professor Gail Whiteman is founder of Arctic Base Camp and incoming Professor of Sustainability at Exeter University. And Greta and her father camped with Arctic Base Camp, I think, a couple of years ago. Tell us more about that. Is that, presumably you were already a climate campaigner before you met Greta Thunberg?
Well, I'm a scientist. I'm a social scientist working on climate change, so that's quite different than activism. But what we do is we set up an event every year at the World Economic Forum at Davos, where we set up a real Arctic research tent and scientists camp there and spread the message of global risk. So we had Greta and her father camp with us in 2019, and the temperature was -18 outside, so it was pretty cold. And then she went into the World Economic Forum to tell them her message of global risk.
And what do you feel about this particular moment? I mean, we're just hearing from her there on how she feels in some ways the lockdown and the Black Lives Matter movement, that both of those things have re-energized or possibly can re-energize the climate movement. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really clear that the first thing is that the world and the governments around the world and the public have woken up to the idea that systemic risk really is a threat and can happen. And that science has an important role to play in letting us know what those risks are and then how to deal with them appropriately. So we can see from that perspective, I agree very much with her that we have to unite behind the science. But on top of that, we can see with things like Black Lives Matter, certainly the power of protest, but also the idea that there is a lot of things that are happening on the ground that we have to stop not looking at. And we can see the same thing with climate change. That's disproportionately affecting developing regions developing regions and all kinds of people around the world. So they're intertwined for sure.
And do you think that people can see increasingly that when they get together in large numbers to protest on a large systemic problem, they can make a difference?
Well, I think we have a moment in time where the world as we know it has changed and business as usual must change and must stop. So we have to reset and we have to reboot the future. So I think people feel empowered, and I think that's amazing.
And you don't feel then that people will simply say as soon as they can, let's get back to the old normal because we're worried about economic damage?
Well, let's get back to a better normal, and I think that's the real thing. Without question, people have suffered both from a health perspective and an economic perspective in the UK and around the world. But as we invest those trillions of dollars, pounds, yen, whatever currency you're using, we have to make sure that those COVID recovery packages are low carbon consistent, because if not, we're just walking into the next crisis.
And do you think that the governments of the world have the kind of managerial, intellectual, everything bandwidth to really tackle that at the same time as they're having to tackle this crisis?
Well, I think that's really the trillion-pound question right now. I mean, certainly it's encouraging that governments around the world, for the most part, are listening to the science. But I think if we take a look at the COVID response, what we really need, say, for example, in the UK, is that the press conferences, not just medical scientists, but we need to have climate scientists there to make sure that the health and the climate are protected as we rebuild our economy.
Gail Whiteman, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
You are watching BBC News.